I've never played a fan game or a ROM hack ever in my life, so I decided it would be a good idea for my first ever playthrough of Pokemon Infinite Fusion to be a hardcore Nuzlocke, which means that any Pokemon that faints is boxed forever, and I only get to catch the first Pokemon I find in any area, which will then have to be fused together for me to use them. And so in way over my head, I picked up my starter, Charmander. And in Pokemon Infinite Fusion, you can fuse together any two Pokemon in the game, which means you sometimes get the coolest thing ever. And other times, it's like they fuse Celebi with a tennis ball. After delivering the parcel to Professor Oak, I run into my next encounter on Route 22, a Nidoran male, which means we can fuse together our Nidoran and Charmander to get our first official member of the team, Charan. Heck, it even looks pretty good. And whenever we fuse a Pokemon, we get to pick which ability of the two to use and which nature. I then hear of a hidden location on Route 1, the Secret Garden, where I pick up a Farfetch'd. And with a Pichu that I find in Viridian Forest, I can fuse the two into Farchu. Not Farchu, Farchu. Stop laughing, he's a very sensitive Pokemon. Another cool thing about Infinite Fusion is you only get to use the same amount of Pokemon as the gym leader, but in this case, we only have two, so it's gonna be all of me versus all of Brock. The man starts out with a Geogy, a rock flying type, meaning you'll have a hard time even if you pick Bulbasaur. I, however, have Farchu, which unfortunately with a special attack lowering nature can't quite one-shot the Geogy. And while we can still outspeed even after a speed drop from Rock Tomb the next turn, this does mean that we're slower than Dignix. And so Farchu the Insufficient is immediately buried. This is awful since Dignix is both super effective and faster than Charan, but for some odd reason doesn't go for Rock Tomb, instead hitting me with Bind, allowing me a free double kick. And as you can see, Rock Tomb would have done an insane amount of damage since we barely just survive it on 2 HP, like we had no business beating this gym. We should be on attempt 2. Brock, I guess, was feeling generous today. And speaking of generosity, outside of Mount Moon, this fine gentleman sells a Magikarp for only 500 Pokédollars, and in Mount Moon itself, I run into the signature annoying Zubat. What being of foul miscreation have I spawned? What's interesting about these fusion Pokemon is they evolve whenever either Pokemon evolves. And since both Charmander and Nidoran evolve at level 16, we get ourselves a Chirino, followed by another Chirino. With Team Rocket up to no good, I'm kinda worried about some of these fusions. Imagine if they find a way to fuse Mr. Mime and Sharpedo. The worst thing about this horrifying thing is it would have to be called Mr. P. Anyway, I come back to Mount Moon at night to pick up a Moonstone. This means I got extremely excited and evolved my Chirino into Charking, which is a terrible idea since it's a fire ground type and we're about to take on Misty. So we're gonna need some new Pokemon, and I begin by catching a Spearow on Route 4 and an Oddish on Route 24 that I fuse into Odro. A truly gorgeous being. The great thing about Misty's level cap being at 22 is we can get our Zucarp to evolve into Zudos, which looks a lot better than what it turns into at level 22 when it evolves into Galdos, the two biggest mouths in Kanto in one. And because both Oddish and Spearow evolve before level 22 as well, we can get our hands on Gluro. So much worse. And so with our two new buffed up Pokemon, our team selection for Misty was incredibly easy. She may have a great type matchup versus Charking, but her Jigglydean can't do anything against Gluro, taking it out in just a couple of Mega Drains. Which sadly for her, only leaves her with a Oddish Staryu combination, which we can easily take out with a couple of Aerial Aces. That went a lot smoother than badge number 1. Then heading towards Vermilion, I pick up a Meowth on Route 5 with the Technician ability. And I think I know just the Pokemon to pair it with. It's the perfect Pokemon to face Lieutenant Surge, and we can guarantee it in Diglett Cave. It's of course Diglett. And these two are kind of perfect for each other because when I fuse them into Meowlet, I can grab Meowth's Technician ability and give it stab moves like Fake Out and Bulldoze, as well as Bite and Rock Tomb, all of which are Technician boosted. Then we just perfectly evolve it into Meow Trio at the level cap of 26 and totally destroy all of Lieutenant Surge's Pokemon with Technician boosted stab bulldozes. Absolutely beautiful. Meow Trio even evolves into Pertrio after the fight. With my sights on Celadon, I pass through Route 9 and pick up a Magnemite before heading into Mount Moon, where I learned that you can repel and talk to this guy to pick up a Hone Edge. Once in Lavender Town, I have a quick scare versus Stinky's Gyarados, and after realizing I don't have a Silph Scope, I quickly skedaddle. Some people fish Pokemon for food, but Wait a minute, we eat Pokemon? We've got almost half the badges and not even a full team of Pokemon, so we've got some work to do. First picking up a Growlithe on Route 7, which is pretty nifty since we can conveniently buy stones at the Celadon department store. I then head to Celadon's finest establishment to bet my savings on picking up one of the best prizes, a Dratini, which means I can fuse together my Arcanine and Dragonair to get Dragonine. Now that's a fusion. Nothing behind the poster. Excuse me, what? Turns out Erica's already onto Team Rocket and they're doing some nasty business in the sewers. And it's here for the first time we take on Team Rocket's Giovanni, who is absolutely terrifying in this game. I mean, in the base game, he's a greater victim of Surf than Hoenn. But here his Pokemon are a lot scarier, the first of which being Arnix, only taking half from a dig because of that Intimidate. He then withdraws as I dig, allowing him to go for an Ice Beam, taking me down to just 4 HP and freezing, so I'm forced to swap out into Goldos, who can get an Intimidate of its own. I do get crit on the switch, but after some healing shenanigans from Giovanni, we can take out the Ryrus with a few Water Pulses, sending in Hon-Chan. Ghost Normal is an incredibly oppressive typing, and Dizzy Punch does so much more than I was expecting, so unfortunately, Gluro has to go down so that Pertrio can come in safely. I then try for a flinch with Bite that does do half, but unfortunately a Dizzy Punch takes me down to 4 HP and gets me confused, so I swap out into Charking as he swaps back into Arnix. And my team is looking pretty grim, except for Charking, everybody's in the red and Dragonine's frozen. With at least one Pokemon at full health, we can take out Arnix with a Drill Run, only leaving Hon-Chan. However, Chip Away does a lot more damage than I was expecting, and Fire Fang isn't even a 2-hit KO if we could outspeed. This means our only shot is to outspeed with Pertrio, but it's not going to survive the switch-in, so unfortunately, we have to swap in Goldos first to take a hit. And while this does mean we can win the fight, it came at the cost of 40% of our team. At least now we have a Sylph Scope. With only half of a full team remaining, we definitely need some new Pokemon, so first I go visit this lady who wants me to take her Eevee for a walk. She then lets us keep it, and its capture location is actually different from Celadon City, which is where we got Dratini. I then go back to Lavender Tower, and since we now have the Sylph Scope, we can pick up a Ghastly and fuse together my newly evolved Jolteon and Haunter into Hon-Chan. And having an incredibly fast, timid nature electric ghost type with Levitate is gonna come in handy. However, our first order of business is to take on Erica so that we can leave Celadon. However, Dragonine is the perfect counter for her team. We can just quad effective Ice Beam her Exegguduo, and stab super effective flamethrowers take out Tanape and Vilebell in one shot each. I'm really glad we didn't lose Dragonine to Giovanni. This takes our level cap up to Koga's 38, meaning that we can evolve our Charking into, well, Charking, but this time Charizard Nidoking. And while that sprite looks really cool, one of its custom sprites is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. Whoever made this is an amazing pixel artist. But don't forget I still have Honedge and Magnemite in the box, which when evolved into Doublade and Magneton make for another amazing looking fusion. No Guard is an amazing ability, but even better is being Ghost Steel since we're now going up against Koga. On top of that, Charking and Pertrio are ground type, so we've got an excellent matchup in this fight. He starts by sending in Venomer, but with a couple of flash cannons from Magnablade, it's taken care of easily. Koga's second Pokemon is the Scyther-Beedrill combination Beether, so in case it's got a dark type move, I swap out into Charking as it sets up Toxic Spikes. The Beether then sets up its speed with agility, even though it's clearly already faster, and a Fire Fang does a ton of damage, even getting a burn. Annoyingly, I then miss a Fire Fang as Koga heals up to full with a Hyper Potion. Instant Karma has Beether miss a Pin Missile, however, and the combination of Fire Fang and burn damage takes it out, leaving him with Magnafang, which isn't much of a fight for our Charking that can take it out with a couple of Fire Fangs. Finally, we face Chinook, the annoying combination of two Pokemon that are awful to face, Chansey and Muk. And as it sets up Acid Armor to boost its defense on top of its already massive special defense, we're not doing a lot of damage. But for this one, ladies and gentlemen, I've got an ace up my sleeve. Magnablade, being a Ghost Steel type, is immune to both of Chinook's stabs. This leaves Chinook with one pathetic option: to try and stall me out with Double Team and Evasion Tactics, which isn't gonna work out too well since Magnablade has no guard. With no guard, we're never gonna miss a move no matter how much evasion it sets up, and since it can't hit us with a single one of its other moves, we're free to just take it out, even if it takes forever. With the Soul Badge acquired, before I leave Fuchsia City, I decide to visit the Safari Zone. I use repels here until I find an area that doesn't exist in base Kanto, where I manage to find a Trapinch. We also have to run around all the way through the Safari Zone to get Surf, and purple shiny Scyther looks so cool. Please, 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 please. No! I've never been so disappointed in my entire life. With a heavy heart, I continue, and at least at level 40, my Hauneon evolves into Genneon. What a beauty. Then, after once again destroying Stinky, which was a lot easier than I expected, we now run into Giovanni for the second time at the Sylph Company, but this fight is a lot different. You see, Giovanni is not messing around, and this time he's challenging us to a double battle, which makes it a lot more chaotic and difficult to prepare for. I start by sending in Magna Blade as Stinky sends in Nidogeot, which immediately gets a massive chunk of damage with Wing Attack against Giovanni's Primarino and takes a quad-resisted close combat like it's nothing. Ryrus then does about 30% to Magna Blade with Brine as I take it below half with a Flash Cannon and lowering its special defense. Giovanni does not seem too thrilled about this development since he immediately withdraws both of his Pokemon, sending in Genkan and Sand Queen. Both of these Pokemon have super effective stab against Magna Blade, so I definitely have to swap out, and I don't have any great options sending in Pertrio, which at least takes below half from a Dark Pulse. Nidogeot hits Sand Queen into the red, and an Earth Power gets Pertrio down incredibly low. Even still, I have nothing I can swap into, so I go for a Bite, actually managing to get a flinch against Genkan the turn that Giovanni heals Sand Queen. And while things aren't looking too hot for Pertrio, at least it can take out Genkan with another Bite, which is probably the most threatening Pokemon on Giovanni's team before going down to Sand Queen's Earth Power. We're gonna miss you, Pertrio. I send in Genneon next, since at least we have Levitate to dodge ground-type moves, and a Shadow Ball isn't quite enough to take out the Sand Queen. Why Stinky goes for Wing Attack instead of Earth Power against Ryrus really perplexes me, but at least I can take out Sand Queen the next turn with a Shadow Ball. Stinky then goes for Thrash, just go for Earth Power, which leaves Ryrus in the red, and Nidogeot gets hit by a Stone Edge. I suppose I need to finish the job myself, taking out Ryrus with a Shadow Ball, and at least Thrash takes out Primarino. It's a huge loss to lose Pertrio here, but at least we have 4 of our Pokemon left. I was also incredibly positively surprised when the president of Silphco gives me a Johto starter, so I pick up a Totodile, which still leaves us with one final mission in Saffron to take on leader Sabrina. Psychic types can be incredibly punishing, but at least we have a Steel type to resist them and a super effective Ghost type in Genneon, who can immediately pick off Hitmime with a super effective Shadow Ball. Next is Ezreon, and before this fight, I made a bit of a mistake, thinking that Genneon has no guard just like Magna Blade. So aside from the fact that this Dark Pulse straight up almost just ends Genneon, both of these Thunders were straight up 70% gambles. Sabrina's ace is Genkazam, but because it's a slower Psychic Ghost type, which is quad weak to Ghost, we can take it out in one Shadow Ball. Finally, we face this Alabro holding an Artichoke, and somehow another 70% accurate Thunder hits its mark and wins us the badge. You'd think after all these ability randomizers I've done, I'd be able to keep track of abilities, but no. Now that we can surf and go to Cinnabar, I end up doing a side quest first to get rid of these Beedrill, where I receive an old Amber. And once I reach Cinnabar, we can immediately revive this thing, turning it into an Aerodactyl, which I'm gonna be fusing with my Totodile, which is now a Feraligatr, turning it into Ferrodactyl. Another absolutely stunning design. Before I head to the Pokemon Mansion, Cinnabar also has a static encounter Absol, which I end up capturing. I then grab a Shelter in Seafoam Islands and turn the two into Cloysul, which you can definitely call a disaster. And so, for the first time in the entire run, with a full team of 6, we go up against the 7th gym leader, Blaine. He starts with a Grass Fire Gludash as I send in my Water Flying Ferrodactyl and immediately go for a Flying Gem boosted Fly to take it out in one hit. He then sends in 9-9, which is a pretty questionable Pokemon for a guy with a mustache to have. So expecting a Thunderfang, I send in Charking, who can outspeed with my Quick Claw the next turn, taking it out in one shot with a critical hit Earth Power. Megadon comes in next, a Magmar and Rhydon fusion that's Rock Fire, meaning it's easily taken out by a quad effective Earth Power. Finally, we face Charodactyl, and with my Quick Claw again, I manage to outspeed and go for a Thunderbolt, doing over half as it gets poison pointed by a Crunch. It then goes for Skydrop, which isn't super effective, and I'm almost at full health, so it's not something I'm super worried about, doing only about 40% as I strike it with another Thunderbolt to claim our 7th gym badge. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is where the difficulty of Pokemon Infinite Fusion truly strikes. You You see, like in Fire Red Leaf Green, we do go to the Sevi Islands, but in this game, things go very, very differently. You know how Team Rocket were trying to fuse 3 Pokemon together? Well, they managed to find a way to fuse together the 3 legendary birds Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno to create a boss fight that's one of the most unfair that I've seen in any Pokemon game. So prepare for trouble as we take on Giovanni for the 3rd time and make it triple as he sends in all 3 legendary birds in one. You're first up, Cloysol, no pressure. Okay, maybe just a little bit of pressure. Cloysol has a hard job being on the front line, but it's here to do one thing and one thing only, to get rid of Zapmolkuno A's Charty Berry that stops it from being taken out by a quad-effective Rock Tomb. Sadly, that is all that Cloysol is ever going to get to do since all 3 birds get to attack us at once, taking it out. If all 3 of these birds stick around, we're definitely going to lose, so I take out Zapmolkuno A with a Thunderbolt from Genyon, who's not going to be able to get hit by a Thunderbolt from the Zapdos. That way, after only taking a Flamethrower, I can swap in Charking, who also isn't going to take anything from Thunderbolt. We can then go for another Rock Tomb on Zapmolkuno M for quad-effective damage, of course weakened by the Charty Berry to do about half and lower its speed. Zapdos then hits me with a Drill Peck, which does activate Poison Point, and a Flamethrower from the Moltres leaves Charking very low in the red. At least Charking managed to survive, so I go ahead and swap in Dragonine, who's not able to be hit by fire moves because of Flash Fire. However, Drill Peck does a massive amount of damage. I was really hoping Ice Beam would do more than this, but at least Zapdos goes for a Thunderbolt, leaving us in the red as the Moltres sets up a Tailwind. This does mean we can get a free switch to Charking, who can't get hit by Thunderbolt, and it's never going to go for Flamethrower, but from there, we really have no Pokemon to swap into. So while we manage to waste a turn of Tailwind and get some poison damage, ultimately, Dragonine has to go down. This way, we can get a switch into Ferrodactyl for free, and while the Zapmolkuno Z manages to stay alive for 1 turn by going for Roost, we can do a lot of damage with an Ice Fang as we only have to take a Flamethrower. Then even with a Charty Berry, a Rock Tomb is enough to take Zapmolkuno Z out, which is the only threat to us with that super effective Thunderbolt. From there, another quad-effective Rock Tomb is enough to take out the Moltres, winning us one of the most unfair Pokemon fights ever, and we only lost a third of our team. And for that reason, we need to hunt a lot of new Pokemon, the first of which being a Ponyta on Cycling Road. I then head over to the daycare where we can get a free Pokemon egg. I then remember I never picked up an encounter on Route 16 west of Celadon where I pick up a Murkrow. Then after a ton of cycling in Viridian City, my daycare egg finally hatches into a Togepi. And after fully evolving that Togepi in my Trapinch, I can fuse them together into Togegon. Looks a bit strange, but it's Fairy Dragon. But we do still need another Pokemon on the team, so I head over to Goldenrod where I can buy myself a Duskstone and thus evolve my Murkrow into Honchkrow, then fuse it together with my newly evolved Rapidash into Honchdash. Which means we've managed to assemble a full team of 6 again as we take on the final gym leader. It's for the 4th time, Giovanni. And I make a huge mistake here. Rhyperius is not a water type, however, of course it has a water type move, quad effective, leaving Charking barely in the red. I'm confident another Flamethrower will get the KO, so I stay in. However, Giovanni starts healing at only half health, which a lot of the trainers in this game seemed to do, allowing me to waste all of Giovanni's healing items and guarantee a KO. Next, however, is Go-Champ, and expecting an Earthquake, I swap out into Genyon, who can dodge it with Levitate. I then hit a Psychic, doing about 75% as it tries to counter me, but then Giovanni withdraws, sending in Electatrio to take my Psychic. And judging by the damage, a Stab Shadow Ball should be enough to take out its remaining health. He then sends in what he should have swapped in against my Psychic, Glistar. So to avoid a Dark move, I swap into Togegon as it misses a Megahorn. A super effective Aura Sphere then does a lot less than I was hoping, and Earthquake does so much to Togegon, forcing me to swap out. Sending in Ferrodactyl as Glistar locks itself into Thrash. Seeing it do over half, I do not have a lot of options left, so I swap in Genyon to dodge it with Immunity. At least the Glistar gets confused, and with limited options, I just fire off a Shadow Ball, doing more than I expected as the Glistar hits itself in confusion. Another Shadow Ball then just barely misses out on the KO, but Glistar hits itself once again for the KO. Go-Champ then comes back, but because it's at such low health, we can just finish it off with another Psychic, leaving Giovanni with only Rylax. Which actually puts us in the same situation as versus Koga, because with the Levitate ability and the Ghost typing, Genyon is immune to both of Rylax's stabs, leaving it to only rest until we finally take it out with a Psychic, winning us the final gym badge. This does mean we still have a fight with Stinky before we can enter Victory Road, however all of his Pokemon were way underleveled Giovanni, so it's an easy sweep. And so my final team going into the Elite Four is Insomnia Honchdash with Wild Charge, Night Slash, Flame Charge, and Flare Blitz, No Guard Magna Blade with Shadow Sneak, Zap Cannon, Flash Cannon, and Sacred Sword, the Levitating Genyon with Shadow Ball, Thunderbolt, Charge Beam, and Psychic, Serene Grace Togegon with Air Slash, Flamethrower, Earth Power, and Aura Sphere, Pterodactyl with Ice Fang, Crunch, Earthquake, and Fly, and our starter Poison Point Charking with Flamethrower, Earth Power, Ice Beam, and Thunderbolt. The time has come to take on the Elite Four Gauntlet versus an incredibly punishing lineup of fusions. First we take on Lorelei, who starts out with the Magmortar and Dugong fusion Magong, which Charking immediately obliterates with a Ground Gem boosted Earth Power. In comes Tentaster, threatening Charking by being faster and having Stab Water moves, so we have to swap out into Magna Blade as it just sets up spikes. Magna Blade's then hit by an Icicle Crash, but luckily we don't get flinched and can fire off a Zap Cannon, taking it into the red and of course paralyzing. Lorelei then goes for a full restore, but we're never gonna miss a 50% accurate Zap Cannon because of no guard, so we can just paralyze it again and take it out with another Zap Cannon. In comes the biggest threat on Lorelei's team, but because of leftovers, we're luckily at full health, so I can stay in, and I would have been able to tank a Night Slash, but it just gets a crit Surf instead, allowing me to hit it with a Zap Cannon for paralysis and then take it out with a quad effective Sacred Sword the following turn. Second to last is the Grass Ice type Gingrowth, so we can easily just swap into Charking and take it out with a quad effective Flamethrower, leaving Lorelei with only one final Pokemon, Mambro. And because it might have water or ground type moves, we definitely have to swap out, but it just goes for an Ice Fang, so we have to pivot out of Genyon again, sending in Pterodactyl. This way I can go for a super effective Crunch, just falling short of doing half, but we get the defense drop as Mamabro goes for a takedown. Lorelei then desperately goes for another full restore, but now Crunch is doing way more than half because of the defense drop, and we easily pick up the victory. So we have to take on the second of the four, Bruno. Now, base Kanto Bruno is an absolute pushover in any game, but with his fusions, he is a bit more formidable. I start by dealing massive damage with a Psychic against his Mavire as he hits a not very effective Thunder Punch. He then just starts wasting potions, giving me a free opportunity to just knock out Mavire with a few more Psychics. He then sends in Steel Champ, and expecting it to go for something like a super effective Crunch, I swap out into Togegon, who would resist it with its Fairy type, but he just sets up a Sandstorm. I then hit hard with a Flamethrower as he misses an Iron Tail, so he goes for a full restore, allowing me to go for another Flamethrower, taking him deep into the red with a crit. Because of that, Bruno withdraws Steel Champ, sending in C-Cross, which is terrible into a Flamethrower, doing over half. A resisted close combat actually does do an impressive amount of damage, but it's not going to stop the next Flamethrower from taking Ski-Cross out. This brings out Steel Champ again, but because he's out of potions and at such low health, we can just take it out with another Flamethrower. Second to last, he sends in a Magneton Onyx fusion, and fearing the Steel move here, I swap out into Charking, who gets hit by an Iron Tail. I go for the quad effective Earth Power, but of course Magnanix has Sturdy, leaving it at 1 HP and allowing it to use Lock On. Bruno then abandons this plan, however, swapping out into Marichan as I hit it with another Earth Power. It doesn't do a lot of damage, and I'm fearing the ground move here, so I swap out into Genyon, who can dodge it with Levitate. I can then outspeed with a Psychic to take out the Marichan, and because the Magnanix is at 1 HP, I can easily finish it off with a Shadow Ball, meaning we've made it to the third Elite Four member, Professor Oak's old flame, Agatha. And this is where the Elite Four gets a lot more tricky, but not right off the bat, since we can take out her lead immediately with a Stab Shadow Ball. She then threatens us with a Dark move from Umpter, so I swap out into Honchdash. She does hit us with a Dark Pulse, but it only does about 15%, allowing me to go for a Flame Charge the next turn to boost my speed and get a little bit of chip damage, after which I take another Dark Pulse. At this range of health, a Flare Blitz is enough to take it out, sending in her Wobgar. Shadow Tag Wobgar is a monster of a Pokemon, but because of Flame Charge, we can outspeed with a Night Slash and handle it right away. Her next Gengar fusion is Snorgar, which is actually a much bigger problem since Normal Ghost is such a good typing, but I can dodge a Body Slam by sending in Magna Blade and then get hit by a Curse, which is actually pretty good since it gets rid of half of Snorgar's health. I don't really want to stay in to take Curse burst damage, however, so I have to swap in Ferrodactyl on a Shadow Punch, which actually does quite a lot of damage, after which I can take it out with a Crunch. Her final Pokemon is Gendoom, a massive special attacking threat, so I send in my special tank Togegon, who gets hit by a Shadow Ball, and unfortunately, a special defense drop means I have to swap out, and I just have to sack Honchdash, but it misses an Inferno. But that doesn't matter since we'll just get taken out by Shadow Ball. Wait a minute, I survived that? By some miracle, Honchdash survives on 3 HP, and a quad effective Night Slash is enough to take out the Gendoom, beating Agatha. Meaning that we still have the toughest of all the Elite Four members, the Dragon Master Lance, to still take on. And as he starts with Dragados, I send in Ferrodactyl, who I've taught Dragon Claw to do over half damage as I get hit by a Hydro Pump. Lance doesn't want to see his Dragados go to a Dragon Claw though, so he sends in Porydra and gets an attack boost from download, but I do over half with a Dragon Claw, so I can just finish it off the next turn instead. He then sends in one of his strongest Pokemon, Togenite, and an Ice Fang doesn't do as much as I was hoping, as Outrage takes me down to just 2 HP, so I definitely have to swap out, sending in Magna Blade to tank the Outrage. This ends up working out pretty well since it's locked into Outrage and I don't take too much damage from it, allowing me to fire off a Zap Cannon to paralyze it. Lance of course then goes for the full restore to get rid of the paralysis and get full health, as I do what I should have done the whole time and use Flash Cannon. Lance uses another full restore as another Flash Cannon brings it down to about half. Because of leftovers, I'm able to tank another Outrage, allowing me to take out the Togenite with a Flash Cannon. I'm then very threatened as he sends in the Fire-type Typhnair, so I need to swap out Magna Blade for Togegon to tank a Fire Blast, but he ends up missing, allowing me to hit it with an Earth Power, doing over half as he sets up with a Dragon Dance, allowing him to outspeed the next turn and hit me with that Fire Blast, but because it's resisted, it doesn't do too much damage, and another Earth Power is enough to take the Typhnair out. With 2 Pokemon left, Lance sends in his strongest fusion, Tyrannodactyl, which just ends up outspeeding me and takes out Togegon with a Head Smash. As unfortunate as it is to lose a Pokemon here, I didn't have a switch in at all against this thing, and at least we can revenge KO it with a Thunderbolt from Genyon, who can also pick up the final KO versus his Dragados with a Shadow Ball, meaning that despite the fact that we unfortunately just lost Togegon and have to go into the final fight with only 5, we've managed to make it all the way to the final fight of the game. So no matter what happens, this run is decided here and now. Stinky starts out with his Nidogeot, so I send in Genyon, but end up missing my first Charge Beam. Genyon definitely makes up for this by not just hitting the next one, but also getting a special attack boost. Then, because the Nidogeot sets up a Swords Dance, I really don't want to miss another one and take it out with a Thunderbolt. This baits in a huge threat on his team, Rhyperior Mortar, which I can hit for over half with a Shadow Ball. It then just misses its Stone Edge, which I would have just barely been able to take, so I can finish it off with a second Shadow Ball. Blastoise is next, and I would just be taken out after failing to take it out with a Thunderbolt, so I have to swap out into Ferrodactyl as it charges up a Solar Beam. This is perfect, giving me a chance to use Flying Gem boosted Fly, but it just barely falls short of taking it out as he then sets up a Rain Dance. This is a big problem since I just used up my only Flying Gem and he healed up to full with a full restore. Fortunately, a Fly still does way over half, but the Blastoise retaliates with a Petal Blizzard, doing massive damage. Predictably, Stinky goes for another full restore here, and after I go for Fly, he does the smart thing and withdraws his Blastoise. This way he can get his Tautor to take a neutral hit and take less damage because of Intimidate. Luckily, however, we have a pretty good answer for this normal Psychic type in Honchdash. We can swap it in for free against Zen Headbutt and then go for a Night Slash for massive damage, but I wasn't expecting Giga Impact to totally destroy me. At least I can send in Charking here to pick up the Revenge KO with an Earth Power. And while this means we've taken out half of Stinky's team, he can just send in Blastoise here. I don't have a great switch in and take me out with a quad effective Hydro Pump, evening the score. This way, Ferrodactyl can come in for free, outspeed, and use Fly for a lot of damage as the Blastoise sets up Rain Dance. But we're not afraid of this thing's water type moves. Instead, we take the chance to go for Fly again to finally take this thing out. But things are far from okay, since Stinky still has his Dragon Dancing Electados, and I have to stay in, since if it goes for Dragon Dance, I at least have to fire off an Earthquake to get some decent damage. Sadly, there's then nothing I can do against a rain-boosted Stab Waterfall. At this point, I have exactly one hope. I need to survive a rain-boosted Stab Waterfall and not flinch. And when I don't, pull off my final Gambit. The only way for me to deal with this Electados is to blow up and go down myself, leaving me and Stinky with only one Pokemon each. And luckily, I've been anticipating this endgame all the way from the start, meaning that with a final spell tag boosted Stab Shadow Ball, Genyon takes out the Star Kazam, thusly and just barely winning my first ever Pokemon Infinite Fusion Hardcore Nuzlocke. And what a run it was. I have to say a huge thanks to the people who created this game. A lot of love and care has gone into all these thousands of custom sprites, and the fresh take on the Kanto story is absolutely incredible. So ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to see me try a randomizer of this game, leave that down in the comments below. And if you like and subscribe, Barachi will grant you a wish.